Great. All right. Thank you. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Eric Thal, Director of Sales for MRK Technologies, and I'm joined by a few of my colleagues today who will introduce here in a moment. Today, we're going to be discussing security around non-traditional IT systems. Virtually every vertical now has to deal with devices other than PCs and servers that now have IP addresses. Operational technology and production systems in manufacturing, point of sale systems in retail, medical systems in healthcare, embedded scanners and tablets for virtually everyone in wholesale and logistics. What all these have in common is that they are important to the business and can't necessarily be secured in the same way we've been securing traditional computing environments. Before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items. We want this session to be interactive, so please use the chat box to submit any questions that come to mind as the discussion unfolds. And then also, we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. If we happen to miss yours, just rest assured we'll be able to follow up with you directly afterwards. And now that we have that out of the way, I'll let our guests introduce themselves. Chris Clymer, will you please lead us off?
Thanks, Eric, and I'm glad to be here. Chris Clymer, head up our CISO practice at MRK. We kind of spend our time as part-time security officers for a lot of our customers. We'll be bringing that perspective to the table here.
Great, thank you. Chris Pruitt, please introduce yourself.
Chris Pruitt, Chief Technology Officer to MRK Technologies. Relatively new to the organization. I've been here for about 9 or 10 weeks. Have spent 25 years in IT and IT security in a variety of organizations, primarily large enterprise, and most of my experience is in the manufacturing sector.
Great, Chris, thank you. And Jason, please.
I'm Jason Middle. I am with MRK Technologies. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer. I work with a lot of clients here in the Northeast Ohio and global. I've got in my previous roles, I was running both infrastructure and security for a major mining company. So I've dealt with a lot of these non-traditional type IT infrastructures that are out there. And I also work with several large healthcare customers now, securing these type devices. So looking forward to the conversation, and thanks for having me here today, Eric.
Likewise, Jason, thank you. And why don't we use that as an opportunity to kick off? Jason, you've had a lot of interesting challenges in securing critical manufacturing equipment. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. They're definitely challenges, that are out there. These type of environments tend to be more different than your traditional, laptop server type environments that you find on your typical corporate IT network. Tend to be a little more delicate, than some of them. A lot of them also tend to be a lot older too. Some of these, especially when you get into the manufacturing fields, we're talking about very large, SCADA, OT systems that are probably replaced once every 25 or so years. So these aren't new technologies that are out there either. So one of the things I first like to talk about as part of this, hey, as you're looking to secure it, if you look at the CIS top 20 or anything like that, one of the first things is just asset management. So knowing what's out there and knowing what devices, like all these that are out there, the scanners, the medical devices, point of sale systems, do you know where they all are, what they're doing, and that's kind of your first kind of 101 basic is saying, hey, do we know about all of our assets that are out there and report it back so then we can make sure we can actually secure them.
Chris Pruitt, same question. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I think, this area is a lot more complex. I think your traditional IT has 30 plus years of experience in trying to protect workstations, servers, storage, networks, that kind of thing, and has really turned a blind eye oftentimes to this non-traditional technology. And a lot of people may not think about it, but manufacturing and healthcare are quite a bit similar. There are elements of older equipment. Jason touched on. You may have some older equipment. You might buy a press as a manufacturer, and you might depreciate it over a 20-year period. Well, guess what? That press came with a Windows XP computer with no recourse on how to update, how to manage, any path forward in year 10, 12, 15. So you're kind of stuck with this old computer. Healthcare is the same. You might, buy a dialysis machine that you think is going to last you 15 or 20 years that is running an embedded operating system. In both industries, there's an element of health and human safety. Obvious in healthcare, but in manufacturing, you may have some of your physical controls to stop a press, to stop a laser cutter, that are incumbent on technology working appropriately. So IT has often tried to use the same methods, the same technologies by which to protect these, and you really can't. You may be handcuffed by capabilities, age of operating system, how much processor memory, how much compute is available on these. So you may not be able to run the latest endpoint technologies. Being a little creative, looking at network-based technologies, whether it's firewalls for segmentation, being able to use deception technology, network detection and response, NDR, a relatively new area, that you can put in some layers of defense, some layers of visibility, but not impact the OT and the ICS networks. That is the bloodline of the company. You need to be able to support the availability of the systems and applications.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Pruitt, can you tack onto this and tell us about some of the significant threats that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, being in IT, I think or IT security rather, I think over the last 15 years, we've all heard crazy stories about PLCs and other equipment being hacked as part of supply chain attacks in gas and oil. Certainly the attacks on the nuclear reactor in Iran. There's a whole host of stories out there about how this type of equipment can be attacked, and really the threats are very similar to IT. And what I would say is, while IT is trying to patch, remediate, maintain these systems over time, non-traditional IT, whether it's ICS, OT, even televisions that people may have in their lobby, phones on their desks, other types of equipment don't get the same kind of attention, right? Most organizations understand how to patch a Windows PC, but they may not know how to protect some device that is connected to the network, but checking temperature as people walk in the building for COVID. New devices that we're seeing from time to time. So threats, similar, but what I would say is it's a much richer target environment. They're typically running unknown protocols or older insecure protocols. Telnet, maybe HTTP, poor password administration. I think we've all, from our perspective, have all seen admin or default passwords on things that people plug in. They set up, they configure, hey, it's working. It's giving the organization the function that they require, right? Most organizations are trying to buy IT equipment like it's a kitchen appliance. I want to go to Target. I want to buy a blender. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to put it on the counter. I'm going to run it for 7 years. When it dies, I'm going to go get a new one. When in reality, there are a lot of components that need to be addressed, a lot of issues, and it is more like a car. Cars have recalls, they have oil changes, they have brake jobs that need to occur to keep them up and running. You don't get an oil change in your car, and guess what? One day you go out there and it won't start. So all of these things, all of this kind of compute and digital things that are occurring in our daily lives, organizations need to look to as a place attackers can hide or potentially risks to the rest of the network, right? It's not being monitored, not being protected. It's an area where an attacker may be able to hide or maintain presence.
Yeah, no, that's great insight, Chris. Thank you. Mr. Clymer, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, so kind of building on what Chris said as far as the threats, I think our exposure keeps increasing, right? So, we talked a little bit about some of the network controls, right? I can't patch these things, so can I isolate on the network? Which is a strategy I've used a lot too. One of the challenges is that we've increasingly got folks who are breaking holes through that network, right? Our stuff that we in IT and IT security have been trying to build walls around and say, it's old, it can't be patched, don't touch it. Well, somebody on the other side of the world is supposed to support that thing 24/7. So we've opened up remote access, and we've done it using the vendor's tools that we know nothing about. Or somebody inside the network has a really great idea. If they can pull speeds and feeds off that manufacturing equipment, they can predict when it's going to fail and get to do predictive maintenance and make everything a lot more efficient. But they've got to poke a bunch of holes through the firewall and suck all this data off of it in a manner that may not be as secure as we'd like, because it wasn't necessarily designed with that in mind. So I think that's one of the challenges here too, that's exacerbating every threat that Chris talked about is more people are understanding this is stuff worth attacking. At the same time, we've had a trend for the last decade of poking more and more holes and making it more accessible. And I think that is some of the kind of rationale behind some of these incidents that we've seen.
Yeah, no, that's great insight, Chris. Thank you. Jason, how do you find that these environments differ from traditional IT?
So I'll give you a few examples here, Eric. Some stuff we already touched on, but again, these tend to be more legacy type environments that are out there in general. Again, we're talking about systems that have been up and running. They're probably the lifeblood of the company. This is where they're probably making a lot of their money. In manufacturing, it's their lines, their belts. In medical, in healthcare, we've got pumps, other things that are being used in the middle of a surgery that's going on. So these are very critical assets, to each company that's out there. So what I typically see is, a few things going on. There's a lot of legacy, so challenges that come along are things like patching, very good in our traditional IT environment. Hey, we've gotten very good over the last 20, 30 years of patching our desktops, patching our servers, other things like that. Those are challenges within these environments. The other big one too is just, it kind of goes hand in hand with the legacy is, hey, what am I allowed to do with these systems? Or how can I even touch them? A lot of the vendors will say, hey, if you install my, your antivirus on here, I'm not supporting you anymore. I'm washing my hands clean of all, responsibilities. And obviously that's something you don't want to do, with these systems because they're critical to your business. So kind of finding, these unique, different approaches is becoming more critical. Chris mentioned NDR, or your network detection and response. That's been something I've used, in the past. It's newer type technology, but it's very effective where you don't need to install agents, you don't need to do things, very non-disruptive, and it tends to work very well within these environments.
Thank you, Jason. Mr. Pruitt, what are some of the things you think organizations should be considering that you're not seeing enough of?
Well, number one, I would say collaboration. IT and what's often called OT, operational technologies, don't get along. They have separate leadership, separate scope of responsibilities. OT often thinks that IT is responsible for IT security, and that they bear no part or nor wish to worry about it. Where IT is very concerned about security often, and less concerned about availability. People aren't in the office. Office spaces 24/7 by 365. So rebooting workstations, taking down parts of server farms on Sundays, may be appropriate, but oftentimes production facilities, shop floor networks, that kind of thing, 24/7 by 365. Can't stop, won't stop. The primary driver for OT is availability. They're less concerned about confidentiality or integrity of data. Maybe concerned about integrity of data, but not considering things like SSL or data protection kind of in stream. to be able to protect data. It's with largely different aspects, right? So getting alignment, and oftentimes this has to come down from the leadership, where leadership in an organization need to understand that security is everyone's responsibility. For a while I was a security officer at a Fortune 500 commercial insurer, and my line was, I can't stand behind everyone and make sure they don't click on things. Security is really everybody's responsibility. And that goes for OT, that goes for devices that are in your lobby, your telecommunications equipment, so on and so forth. So reducing friction, having meaningful discussions, collaborating on what will work. And IT also, looking at the portfolio that they've been, pushing and supporting for a long time, realizing that toolkit may not be and likely will not be effective in the ICS and OT networks. They need to start from scratch. It needs to be a greenfield discussion of how can we do better. Jason had mentioned in inventory. Inventory your products, inventory your capabilities, inventory your data, understand where your risks are, and then really start with a discussion on what we can do. If IT attempts to push down IT related solutions, what's going to happen? Things break, things slow down. And this creates more of a divide. We've all seen this, we've all experienced it, and it's hard to reach across the aisle and say, what I've got isn't going to work, but we need to do something together. Ultimately, that's kind of the keystone for this area of security. But from a technology perspective, being able to look at kind of non-traditional solutions. We talked about NDR, network detection and response, network access control, NAC, firewalls internally. A lot of organizations will have them at the perimeter, but not necessarily securely segmenting their industrial networks or other areas. There has been, I've seen an interesting push over the last year or two where leadership for OT and IT have been combined, where a CIO is now responsible for OT, as some organizations really embrace industrial 4.0, more digital footprint in those production areas. So I think the road is narrowing. I think we need to work together a little bit more. But on the process side as well, looking at brand new processes, really OT and IT coming together in that area as well.
Yeah, no, that's great insight, Chris. Thank you. What I'm hearing is, spending some time focusing on the people and the process. Chris, Mr. Clymer, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
I do. I kind of want to underline what Chris is saying about collaboration. I think that's hugely important. In a good CISO in your organization is going to be the one who's really going to be adept at facilitating, right? This is it's not entirely a technology problem. A lot of this is a political problem, and somebody needs to have the skills to really navigate that stuff, right? To understand the technical problems well enough to figure out what probably should be done, and then to fight all those political battles and do all the negotiation back and forth between IT and OT and all the other stakeholders in the organization to kind of get to a good enough monitoring. If you don't have good detective controls and monitoring, we've talked about NDR and these things, right? If you don't have your own SOC or a third-party MSSP, those are good things that may give you a little more visibility, since we can't actively prevent some of these things in these environments without breaking the old hardware. Well, maybe we can do a better job monitoring. And Jason, I kind of want to throw to you, because I'm thinking, on this political stuff and the collaboration, I know in your past role, you dealt with that really well. And one of the things I felt like you had was patience, right? Where you went through an iterative process over several years to try to build kind of one thing and then a little more and a little more. Maybe that's worth sharing a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to build on both what Chris and Chris kind of said there. between the IT and OT type environments, we have competing priorities, that are out there. I mean, IT is, kind of more focused on protection, and the OT side is, hey, it's all about production. Hey, how much can I get off this belt? I don't want any downtime. Most of those systems too, hey, they're 20 years ago, they're not highly available. They when they're down, the company's not making money. So one of the things that we worked on, it's breaking down those barriers, because you're right. From an organizational side, typically, this is now more converging, but in the past they've been totally separate from each other. OT's kind of done its own thing, IT's done its own, their own thing at that point in time. Having the conversations, bringing people together. Couple things that I'll throw out there too. So like in the past, with pen tests, as you're doing a penetration test, bring someone in and work hand in hand with your OT environment. These environments I talked about earlier, a lot of times are very delicate. Maybe your traditional pen test isn't the way you want to do it. Maybe it's actually going to the site, sitting down next to the person, talking to them, telling them why we're doing this, and have the pen tester actually run some of the stuff. Because in the past, hey, we've knocked down things, just because the simple vulnerability scanner, as part of any pen test that you're going to do, isn't, configured to be as, for these OT networks, like, hey, it's scanning, it's kind of being harsh, it's trying different usernames and passwords, and hey, you can knock over production. So working with those people, saying why you're doing it, and being there kind of with them, it goes a long way. One of the things I'll also say is, we've talked about, with that convergence, is don't feel that you have to have all of IT standards pushed onto OT. Slowly build that over time, and maybe you never get there, and that's okay. The example I like to use is patch management. I see it at a lot of companies we work with right now. They're on the IT side, they're on this monthly patch management. Patch Tuesday comes, now I'm doing my dev systems, and a week later I'm doing my production, and in less than 30 days I've got the latest patches up and running. That whole methodology does not work well at all in an OT environment. So having those conversations, it's great. Maybe you get some great people, process, and technology on your IT side. Know that what you have there, you're not just going to be able to take over and plop down on your OT side. In the past, some of my experiences have been, okay, well, hey, vendors only will push out updates once a quarter. So maybe, from that side, maybe we're only patch 2 or 4 times a year. Coordinating that with a whole different other methodology of, hey, when are we going to take some production downtime? A lot of times, in both, especially like in the manufacturing world, there's scheduled downtime. Hey, we're going to pull this belt offline, and do some maintenance on it the 3rd weekend in the 3rd quarter. Okay, hey, could we patch the systems at that same time? Well, yeah, absolutely. You're not going to affect us. So just kind of one of the things I'd say is don't take the old methodology and try to just forklift it and plop it down over there. Work with those people, and the best thing you can do is just meet with them. Have those conversations and build a relationship. It's not going to be there day one in most companies. In most companies, I'm kind of stereotyping here. Hey, those functions have been so segmented from each other that it's going to take a little bit of time to build the bridge.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jason. That's great. So, Jason, we have a question coming in now. Do you have any tips for developing a strategy and dealing with security around OT?
So, building a strategy, around the OT networks, I would say, what I would typically recommend for most companies that are out there is start with some type of risk assessment that's out there. Work from there. Kind of see where are the biggest risks within that environment. If you can, as part of that process, try to include the IT side, along with it. And typically out of your normal risk assessment, you're going to start to put, you should see a strategy starting to develop, with timelines, other things like that. I just previously talked about, it's not going to happen overnight. And again, these strategies themselves could be vastly different than what you're typically used to. I'm calling it from an IT perspective. And taking some new approaches, to, those strategies to further secure, looking at different technologies, I think it is a good piece to the puzzle there too. We mentioned several different, as we talked about earlier, but, these OT type environments are different, so using even different technology, in a lot of cases will make sense, such as like segmentation, NDR, NAC, other things like that are great technologies that you may or may not have in your IT environment. Now, and actually on a reverse of that, you may look at these as the genesis to kind of bring them in on your OT, your operations side. And maybe it's actually a fit for your IT environment too. Some of these tools, do very well on both sides, and it could be a very big win for you. One of my favorites, and we hit about this earlier, was along the lines of the I call it IoT, or these new devices that are popping up, the thermostats, the coffee makers, the vending machines, and things that are popping up onto people's networks. These are new threats, that are out there that people have never seen. And a lot of times things just get plugged in or connected to your Wi-Fi that you have no idea about. My favorite story was a hack that happened in Vegas not that long ago to a casino. They got hacked via a fish tank. So just think about that. They had a smart fish tank that was sending data back to the person who was cleaning the fish tank to say, hey, your fish tank's dirty, you need to come out and do it. But that remote connectivity into that network, was how the attackers got a foothold and slowly escalated their privileges to take advantage, to do a lot more. So one of the things you got as part of that strategy that you put together, think about these new things, think about how you're going to find these and how you're going to identify these type of new threats and assets within your environment.
Yeah, oh, that's great, Jason. Great story. Thank you. The old is forever new. Start with a risk assessment, right? Chris, can you tell us about some of the tools that a SOC has to help deal with some of the operational technologies that need to be secured?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, trying to find staff in 2021, has been a tall task for organizations. They, whether it's on the leadership side, they may not see the need nor want to hire a full-time security officer. But certainly from a SOC perspective, trying to staff a security operations center 24/7 by 365 is tough. But risks don't stop after 5 p.m. Eastern. These things are often, in perpetuity around the clock. In my experience, most ransomware events kind of kick off on Friday evening and run through the weekend, and then come Monday or Tuesday is when you're notified or realize that things have gone off the rails a bit. We talked about monitoring, and that's a incredible control. May not have protective controls, but you may have really good detective controls in your environment. Well, detective controls, a lot of alerts saying, hey, somebody do something about this. Time is of the essence. In incident response, we're often talking about mean time to remediation, right? Ponemon Institute every year provides some information on how long attackers are in environments. A couple of years ago it was 200 days, and then 190, and I think last year it may have been 180. This year it's the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. It's sub 40 days before the attackers are notifying people, largely because of the impact of ransomware. They don't need to wait around anymore. They don't need to find the goods. They just lock everything up, encrypt everything. So time is of the essence. As an MSSP, being able to monitor customer environments is incredibly valuable to the customer. And we've also touched on the complexity. 20 years ago, all of your data was in your data center, all of your compute was in your walls, and today it's not. The pandemic, a lot of your compute is in people's homes, in coffee shops, or wherever else. It's in people's pockets. Your data is sprinkled throughout the internet. You may have O365, Azure, AWS, Workday, other software as a service. Trying to monitor all these environments or protect these 24/7 by 365 is become increasingly more complex. You also might have OT technology that's talking to the cloud through your internal environment. And I think Chris Clymer had talked about kind of two-way where people are coming in. Certainly the fish aquarium story kind of talks about that. So timeliness is of the essence. Being able to have good detective technology is just as important as protective technology. Being able to defend appropriately, monitor appropriately, and respond quickly are really where we're at. And all three of those, in my estimation, are critical to success.
Thank you, Chris. All right, I think that about sums it up. Thank you again to Chris, Jason, and Chris for joining us today, and thank you to the folks who joined us for the webinar. Again, if we weren't able to get to your question during the session, we'll be in touch very soon to make sure we get you the answer. And with that, I think we're all set. Thank you again for your time today, and have a great rest of the day.